You're listening to The Local Maximum, episode 277.
Time to expand your perspective. Welcome to The Local Maximum. Now, here's your host, Max Sklar.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome. You've reached another Local Maximum. Hope you enjoyed last week's episode on the Dictator of Easton as much as I did. I always like tapping into my past creativity to see if there's anything I can revive there. And in this case, there was. So if anyone saw that episode, I would like to hear your thoughts about it. Head to the locals, maximum.locals.com, or email us, localmaxradio@gmail.com. We're going to talk today about open source software, who works on it and why, and how you can join an open source community and how exciting it really is. And not to mention some developments coming around recently. We're going to get into Web3, all that. My next guest is an open source software developer, and he is the creator of the famous Homebrew package manager, which if you develop on a Mac like myself, you've probably been using it for years. He's also going to tell us about his latest package manager, tea.xyz, the revenge of Web3. This guest also has a great name. Max Howell, you've reached the Local Maximum. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Very excited to have you on the show today. Let's start with the idea of open source. Well, first of all, before we get into open source software, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Maybe a little bit about your background and some of your earlier projects, Homebrew in particular. How did you get it? What attracted you to open source software in the first place?
So I didn't know what I was going to do with myself at school. I had many interests and I was good at quite a few of them. And for some mysterious reason, I chose to do chemistry. So I went off to university to do a chemistry degree. I did a master's, in fact. I really enjoyed aspects of it. And with hindsight, I realized the aspects I enjoyed were the ones that were more similar to programming. So I went off and did a year in industry and discovered that I hated working in industry for science in general. I could see it extrapolate to the whole science. And so I quit and fell into a depressed funk where I didn't know what I was doing with my life.
Well, what was it what were the problems that you had with it when you were in science and industry?
So I really enjoyed the first 3 months I was in industry, working with the big machines.
Sure.
And
that's what I think, because we were just typing all day. It's like, sorry, go ahead.
I in many ways wish I'd picked a career that involved not sitting at a desk all day, but that's another story. The big machines were fun. It was fun talking science to all the people. And then after 3 months, went home for Christmas, came back, and I realized when I got back that I would be using the same machine that I'd been using for the last 3 months for the next 10 years. And that was my career trajectory. There was no way that I could advance in science without becoming an expert in one very niche area of it. And it depressed me. And then I realized that everyone I was working with was happy with this status quo, and that nothing really changed. Nothing was moving very fast. I wasn't going to change the world. So those sort of things really. So in my depressed funk, I discovered open source and Linux.
You'd think that, I mean, as someone who's been in software for a long time, it's like you kind of imagine science as being maybe, just as fast, just as innovative. But I guess that's not the reality.
I only did it for a year, so I'm sure that there are places where it can move fast. Certainly my impression was that it doesn't. I felt that way when I was at university towards the end anyway, when I was working with professors and they'd spent years working on tiny little pieces of problems. And when I would talk to them about how this could be used in the real world, they were like, oh, I don't care about that. They didn't care about applying. It was just the pursuit of knowledge.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Yeah. It sounds interesting, the pursuit of knowledge, but I feel like there's, sometimes application is a lot harder than people give it credit for. It's almost sometimes the hardest thing. But so let's go with open source software. What attracted you to open source specifically, and how does that actually work in practice? Like maybe we could even start with like a basic like what is open source?
Yeah, what is open source? I found myself asking that question a lot over the last 18 months. Uh, Open source is the desire to fix problems, but also the desire to do it with a bunch of other people. The knowledge that it requires all these other people working in different ways to improve the system. It's all about improving the system. We've built this elaborate machine that we call Unix, Linux, Windows to some extent. It's really Linux. And over the last 25 years, we've been like building on top of every piece that we've built before. And all of us have to do this together. It's a kind of super intelligence. All of us coming together to try and build this machine that will do the things we need it to do. And there's lots of pieces to it, and there's lots of fractal offshoots that go all over the place. But all these pieces seem to come back and integrate with each other and build on top of each other and become better by being the sum of more than just their pieces. And it's addictive being part of that. I think a lot of people who don't even realize that they like working with large groups of remote people with different agendas and different desires is actually super fun. Find it to be super fun. Like I didn't expect to like that. I have to say, wasn't what attracted me to it in the first place. What attracted me to the first place was like I was bored and depressed, and I'd heard about Linux, so I installed it. And then when I installed it, I discovered that it was shit. But it was also super great in so many ways. I could see how I could improve it. I could see how I could get in there and just, the bits I didn't like, I could fix it. And that was the mantra. That was all you ever read on like Slashdot, which is what I used to read back then. It was 2004-ish. It's like people would complain, and then the comment immediately afterwards that was rated +5 insightful was, well, it's open source. Why don't you fix it yourself? Which, it's kind of like a passive, it's like the learn to code things that people were saying a few years ago.
Right. Like you don't expect anyone to actually go in and take that seriously, but people do.
Yeah, well, that's it's vital that some people do,
right.
Which is, kind of why I started this company, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah,
the fact that it's vital that some people do.
Yeah. I want to get into that in a minute, but so when it comes to open source, I mean, I guess the question that I want to ask, which I kind of feel like you just answered, but I sort of want to ask it more explicitly, is like, how do you know what to work on, and how do you how do you know? Isn't it the same with anything when you're like trying to be like, am I solving the right problem? Or, I mean, I guess in the case of Linux, were you thinking of more, okay, there's just some bug that everybody knows is a bug that everyone deals with. So of course, fixing that is a good idea. I guess, I don't know. Do you have any strategy in terms of picking your projects?
Yeah, totally. Like, I often say to people that getting involved with open source is the fastest way to like become this kind of the kind of programmer you want to be. Like when I'm talking to people who are still like trying to figure out where they're going and how they're going to learn all the things they need to learn, it's super valuable. Like that's how I got into it. Right, I didn't do a computer science degree. I did a chemistry degree, and then managed to get myself into the industry via open source because it was like a fast track.
Right.
There's no like, but well. What would you get involved with? Certainly something that you need. It's completely essential. If you don't want it, then you're not gonna do it. Like this is part of the problem with developers with their 20,000 side projects, right? Is that all 20,000 of them?
I feel seen with that, but yeah, go ahead.
So the reason none of them ever get finished is because they're not really things that person really wanted. It's a nice idea. I think a lot of the time people come up with nice ideas, but if you don't personally need it, you're definitely not going to make it with open source. Now, maybe you can make a business out of it, and that's motivating because you're going to make some money. But with open source, if you don't personally need it, it's just not going to get built. Or it's like something that you use and it has like a bug, or you can see a feature that you personally need, or it's a bug that personally pisses you off, then that's a great way to get into it. But like pick the right kinds of projects, right? Like I think a lot of people see VS Code and see something which could be improved or has a bug because it always has a bug. Like they fix a bug and they make a bug. It's just how it works at Microsoft, I think. And
Right.
but have you seen that code base? No one wants to go in there. It's not a good choice. It's too big. It's too uh, not really architected as much as evolved. So you pick a project that's small enough, preferably new enough. New is good because when you get involved with a new project, they go, "Hey, do you want to get involved more?" Because we don't have anyone who is involved more yet. Like with Homebrew, the people who turned up in the first 6 months were the people who were there still 4 years later, and they were the ones that everyone was turning to and saying, "This is the expert in this project," because they've been
Yeah.
there since the start.
Yeah, that almost reminds me of there's some companies that where not every project is like this, but you're working on something that you use every day, and those are always the most fun because then it's like you don't even need to, it's like even if it's not open source, sometimes it is, but you're like all the employees are like, oh, let me fix this, let me fix that, because they know what the problems are. But yeah, so let's get into the main event. What's the idea behind tea.xyz? And just to give like a little adversarial question, wasn't package management solved with Homebrew? Why do we need this new one?
Yeah, well, it's a fair question. Honestly, I haven't actually been asked that many times. So Brew. I made Brew in 2009. It was a project I needed personally, like I was just saying, right? I
It
was
blows my
working with,
mind that only existed. I mean, I guess 2009 is a long time ago now, but
it is a bit of a long time ago now.
I guess I guess it blows my mind that that it's not even that new or
No,
not that old. I don't know.
well, when you start looking, well, this is a completely different conversation,
Like
but when you
like
start
when I
looking
was
into
in
the age
school,
of
that didn't
things,
exist.
yeah,
You know,
well, some of these
but
projects are a lot newer or a lot older than
yeah,
you think, and they become indispensable over time, a period of years. Like Homebrew, I'd say it took about 3 to 4 years before people considered it indispensable, and then it's been another 10 since then. Like
yeah,
it's
wow,
a huge monolith at this point. But yeah, so I made it 2009. I was challenged by a coworker to stop moaning about this tool that I wanted to build or didn't exist and to do something about it. So I did. And it was just like that, really. I just did one weekend. I just started programming it. And like the name was because I came up with the idea in a pub. And like drinking was actually kind of revered in programming at the time. This was like very early Web 2 and so yeah. So like GitHub used to boast about how they had a tap like on their programmers floor. Like, you could just pour yourself a beer at any time. Can you imagine GitHub like boasting about that now? Like certainly not. So yeah, it seemed like a cool idea for a name and theme, and like I built it and it was good. So I open sourced it, and then the rest is history. Really, it got attention quite quickly. Hacker News went crazy all over it, which is probably the first and last time they've liked anything I've ever done. Don't know. Hacker News is just like a source of toxicity, really, isn't it?
how did you
Um,
know? How did you know that this tool was needed? Like what? I don't even know. Like how did people do package management before then?
well, there was other package managers. There was two major ones actually for Mac. Um,
Hmm.
Mac ports, which was a fairly literal port of ports from FreeBSD to Mac, and Think, um, which I don't know as much about.
Yeah.
Neither of
Am I
them were.
crazy that I've never heard of these as in the industry for however long?
Well, Mac ports still exists.
Sure.
It's better than it used to be, certainly, but yeah, didn't capture the imagination nearly as much as Brew. Like Brew really just exploded. So
Hmm.
yeah, there was tools, but they weren't very good, and they lacked the things. And what I really wanted, which was one that was more hackable, more developer focused, and well, I got into open source like years before that. At this point, like four maybe, not years, I guess. And I'd done a lot of packaging because it's just necessary when you're working with Linux and open source and you're trying to help other people to install your source code. So I came at it from the perspective of I want it to be easier for everybody, developers and users alike, to get the things they want. Because that's the attitude I've always had with like package managers, is that they're kind of an unsexy, boring tool, and what you want is for them to get out of the way so you can get on with what you really want to do, which is use some tool or app or library or framework or integrate something, get all the dependencies set up, and then bugger off. That's what you want. So I came over with that perspective, and it was timing was great, right? Because Mac was just becoming the choice for developers. Before that, it really wasn't. It was a mix between Windows and Linux, and because OS X had come along and decided to be Unix rather than Mac OS, which what they called it before, right? It was its own custom thingy. It attracted a lot of Linux guys over, and it just was the moment. And I built it in Ruby, and Ruby and Rails had just become like something that was super popular. So it captured a lot of mind share and interest, and just took off. But why do we need another one, right? That's your question.
Yeah.
Isn't Brew good enough? And like that's the thing. It is good enough. Like I don't want to shit all over my creation too much, but I haven't worked on it in a long time, like 2015, 2016. I burned out because I did do a lot of work on it, tens of thousands of hours easily.
Wow, that's a lot.
I quit jobs regularly in order to work on it full time, and then when I had a full time job, I had 2 full-time jobs because one was Homebrew. It's huge.
Yeah,
I
can see that.
Huge amount of contributions to manage, massive community formed, and I loved working on it. I was very proud of it, and I wanted it to succeed. Completely determined. Anyway, so I eventually burned out, and I passed it to the community, which had formed. I was part of governance until a couple of years ago still, although honestly I didn't really participate a huge amount. I felt it was done. It was good enough. And that's the thing, it's only good enough. There's so much more that can be done at the package manager layer, and that's what we're trying to do with Tea. Like we're splitting the tool into 2. This is news. By the time this podcast comes out, it'll be live. So we've got a command line interface and a graphical interface. And the graphical interface is where I think a lot of the innovation will happen over the year. But the CLI itself is still awesome. We have what we call magic, which makes it so you don't even think about installing packages. You just type the commands you want and it finds them, installs them, makes it work. It seems a bit archaic, really, the whole managing packages business. It's the kind of tool that someone who really loves what they built forces down your throat. They're like, I'm so proud of this. You're going to have to think about it. You must think about how to manage your packages. How dare you even consider the idea that you shouldn't? So you don't have to anymore with Tea. Everything's isolated developer environments. I think Docker had the right idea, right, with making it so you can have little containers, but I think they had the wrong idea in that you have to spin up a whole freaking virtualized Linux instance. Developing inside of Docker is a pain in the butt. So we've got containerization, like thin containers, essentially, at the development layer. And scripts are cool, but they suck because you can't get the packages. So with T, you can just get all the packages. You put a bit of YAML front matter at the beginning of your script, and then when you execute it, it just installs all the stuff. And the GUI is going to be cool. I won't go into the features. We're going to roll them out this year. So it's just like there's so much more that could be done, and nobody did it. It's like package managers are stagnant. They haven't really changed since the first one 25 years ago. Slackware, I think, came up with it.
So why do you think that is? Is it because there just isn't demand for this innovation, or is it some problem with the fact that everyone's working for free, essentially?
Yeah, I don't know. I wondered about that. Certainly, if I'd known how tedious packaging was going to be before I wrote Brew, I might not have done it. There's an awful lot of frustration involved in packaging up this software, but you get good at it. And now I'm good at it again, because it took me, probably 12 months to get good at it again after starting T to, remember all the tricks and then learn all the new ones. A lot of stuff's changed.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating and it's not sexy. No one really like, well, you know, I get a lot of people come up to me and thank me for brew and they're like, you know, they love it. They say, they claim, at least that's what they say to my face. But really, it's not
People
React,
don't
right?
complain
It's
about
not an
homebrew.
app.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, no. I don't. People are not complaining about homebrew behind your back. I don't think. I don't hear any.
Well, you know, it has problems. It has
Although
problems that we've
every piece of
addressed.
software has people complaining about it, though.
Yeah.
At
Brew
some point.
became really slow over time,
Hmm.
and they sped it up a bit recently for certain operations, but it's still slow. Tea's 5 to 6 times faster. We've done the measurements, so
Yeah. Wow.
and you know, it's clunky. Brewers, it's not the same as it used to be. Doesn't work as well as it used to. I you know, like when I was more actively working on it, it was a simpler set, right? There was less packages in it,
Sure.
less platform supported. So, you know, I understand. But T out the gate, we're cross-platform. We support Linux and Mac, both first-class citizens, and then Windows WSL2 is, you know, because it's Linux, the same. But we're working on the Windows native version as well. You know, we
Gotcha.
think that you should be able to use whatever platform you want. And then the package manager, you know, we're trying to essentially build the universal package manager so that people can be enabled to do everything they need to in the world, whatever their profession.
Gotcha. Gotcha. What is there like? It's my understanding. Tell me from what's the like the Web3 portion of this work? Is that
Ah,
something that you
yes.
like to? You know, is there? There's a. I heard there was a token involved. Is that true or?
Oh, yes.
Explain to me what the deal is with that.
So the Web3 part is the whole reason I did this because after I stopped working on Brew full time, I didn't stop taking notes about features I wanted to add to it, things I wanted it to do, but I didn't have the motivation to do it again. Like I moved on to, I did a lot of iPhone apps, did a load of websites, worked at a bunch of different startups, and yeah, I didn't want to, you know, I didn't even have the time. How was I gonna, how was I gonna spend another 10,000 hours on a project? And yeah, but I still wanted the tool. And then it was when I started looking into Web3 stuff, like with the last bull market run, because I had a friend who was always trying to get me into crypto. You know, I had a friend who was trying to get me into just about everything at one point or another, and crypto never really appealed. I think I'm a bit unique in the Web3 space in that I never really saw the point until I started looking into it a little bit more carefully. Bought an NFT, sold an NFT, saw the smart contract send 10% of what I sold it for to the original artist, and I had that a moment of inspiration about it. I saw how I could use smart contracts to do the same for the open source ecosystem. And you know, like people have tried to fund open source for since its inception, really. It's only in the last 10, 15 years, I'd say, that it became the foundation of all modern software. Before that, you know, Microsoft had quite a monopoly and a lot of stuff ran on Windows. But open source proved that it was a better value proposition and a better innovation platform. And so Windows fell aside. But in the process of that happening, all the people building open source didn't like take all that money that Microsoft were raking in. They didn't get that share. It didn't come to them. And so like people like me would find that they wanted to work on open source, but they couldn't figure out how to do it. That so many times I tried. I had a Patreon for a bit. I tried to run a blog where I posted things you could subscribe to for
Yeah.
content, and it was just not the part of what the work I wanted to do. Right, I didn't want to sell myself, have to market myself, and so I stopped both times when I didn't really have anything near enough to live on,
It's hard work.
and I yeah.
It's like yeah, it's possible, and there are a lot of projects that do that, but it's hard work.
I know people who do, and I talked to them about it while I was trying to do it. And they would, you know, they'd spend years on it, I think, as well as also part of the problem. But I'm not a creator economy kind of person. I want to build cool stuff kind of person. Everything else is tedious. Even documentation, which I know is so important, so I do a good job of it. But I only do a good job of it because I know it's vital. Marketing myself doesn't feel vital.
Right. I wonder if there's anyone who really loves writing documentation. Probably, you
I
know.
know one, and I'm desperately trying to hire him.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Maybe I'll have a better luck of it than I else can.
Yeah.
Because, Web3's got a huge stigma, and I found it hard to hire some of the people I know are great. And I understand why it's got such a huge stigma. There's just so many scams, people trying to get your money. But people say that what we're building is like the first time they've seen like a use for crypto that makes sense, that's a genuine utility. And that makes me feel good about it. But the idea, of course, is to fund open source, obviously. The way we're going to do it is by building the package manager graph into the blockchain. So the registry, the information about all open source software, putting that online, then this information allows us to flow token down that dependency graph. So if token enters at the top, like for something that people actually know about and care about, like an app of some kind or a top level framework, then all the dependencies all the way down to libc end up getting a little piece of that token. So it breaks off every time a little percentage all the way down. That's one of the big differentiators between us and what people have tried before is like the idea of funding the whole graph, not just the tips, not just the points.
Yeah. Well, so would you be funding the whole graph because you'd be the way I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you're saying like, okay, if we're funding like the top level project, but that project uses like 5 other projects, then each one of those is going to get a cut, and then maybe those use other projects, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yep, a little cut all the way down, powered by smart contracts, and the fact that you can divide the crypto into such small pieces.
What?
So,
and I hate to. This might be a question that goes nowhere, but the only thing that popped into my head was like, what if there's a circular dependency?
Yeah. So we've taken into account, we're using Google's PageRank algorithm, essentially. It was always the idea that it would use something like that, but one of my staff pointed out that it was a natural fit, so we've been using that. And PageRank has a mechanism for preventing circular dependencies from increasing the rank exponentially. So it just works, in other words. But, like dependencies are more complicated than that. We've had to figure out, like, is a build dependency as valuable as a runtime dependency? Because, if you build a tool that uses Rust, it only uses Rust when you build it. It doesn't use it when you run it. So, they're equal as far as we're concerned. But we feel that, once the system works, it will incentivize open source in whole new ways, like allowing people to identify areas that are getting too much, more than they deserve, and seeing that means there must be a niche there to create some kind of new library that fulfills something that's more specific or even more generalized, perhaps. That'd be up to them to figure it out.
So where does the first, like, where does the edge of the graph, where does that funding come from? Like, who's going to have to pay for what on the end user?
Yeah, so we've got a proof of stake network, which pleases people who think proof of work is bad for the climate, which, I don't think they're wrong about. I don't think it's hugely bad, like when you compare it with things, but yeah, it's proof of stake. So you, as someone who's interested in open source, will stake against the projects that you use, and tea.xyz or tea.gui will be able to tell you what those projects are, because we're integrated with your system. We know what you're using. This would be great for companies like Microsoft could just pull all the tea instances installed to get their entire graph stated to them. So staking systems give you rewards every epoch. Like Ethereum's is every 2 days, I think. And that reward will be distributed to the person who's staking and to the things they're staking against. And then it flows down. So people who are interested, who believe in the value of open source, can be rewarded for that. They identify projects that are worth staking, then they'll be rewarded in proportion to like that. And also they'll be able to fund the open source ecosystem. There's sort of a double bonus for them. We're not going to like charge a micro payment for installing packages or anything like that, which is something people often think we're going to do. But I came into this knowing that it had to be an innovation that didn't change how people fundamentally use open source currently. I could build a package manager that said every time you install Node, it's going to be 0.1 cent, but it just wouldn't take off. People say they want to fund open source, but actually they don't, which is why we've created the system where it's more like investing.
Yeah, so it's more like investing. So like if I stake against an open source project, like what incentive do I have to do that?
Because you'll be paid stake rewards.
I'll be paid stake reward. Okay, and does it actually and like and I guess it somehow like I guess I'm trying to think, and maybe I should. It kind of makes me want to read more into this. But like, how does it actually? Does it fund the project itself? Like, does a portion of the staking rewards go to the developers or something like that?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Because it's complicated, right? Every open source project's different. They have different people who are active, and maybe they also want to try and fund people who do pull requests and things like that. And there's another beautiful thing about building this on crypto, right? Because we're building it with EVM compatible blockchain so that people can write their own smart contracts on top of that. And so we're going to encourage that. So every project will have a wallet, which is where the funds go. And we'll encourage you to be multi-sig about that. But we will then insist that you form a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, for that wallet. So you'll spin up a smart contract, we'll give you a bunch of templates, and that contract will describe how the token is distributed and who it is distributed to. So you could have one where it only goes to yourself. And I'm sure some people will do that, even though they have a project where they have multiple people working on it. But like if you are the sole maintainer, that makes sense, right? Or you could pick one where a percentage is set aside to fund pull requests. So other participants can receive token rewards for their contributions. Or like you could fund translations. There's so many options. I'm truly excited to see what people will do with it. So yeah, we're launched with a few template options suggesting you go with one of these different types, and then we'll see what the community, because every project's different. Every project has a different situation.
Do you have any specific projects that are examples that want to build off this or are building off of this currently?
So none of the big ones I've approached have shown a great deal of interest. And I'm not surprised. The big ones have already figured out their funding methodology, or, they're content enough with how things are going. Something that happened a lot over the last 10, 15 years was companies would hire the people working on these projects, which, sounds like a great solution, but I think actually has been quite negative. So, you can get funded to, you're paid to work on your project full time. But then the company ends up like putting some of your time towards other things as they need you, or they have an agenda, right? Open source is for everybody, not just for Microsoft or Facebook or Google. And like recently, like Kubernetes is like falling apart because Google have been doing that with the staff that work on it that they hired. So yeah,
so
I don't like
is it that they make demands on their time, or is it that they like kind of subvert the project to their ends?
It's a bit of both, right? Nothing's that nefarious. Like I make it sound like these are villainous people. It's impossible for there not to have been some consequences that end up shaping the project. Like, open source is good for people see that things are bad and then they spin up a fork or like they're on an alternative, and that just like propagates all over the place. But yeah, anyway, back to your question. Big projects probably won't, at least initially, but the smaller ones, now I get a hell of a lot of interest from those. The ones where it is like someone's side project that turned into a bigger project, that turned into a bigger project, and they're working on it like all these hours that they don't really have, and they have a full-time job. They would love to work on these projects full-time, or even like, spin up a couple more open source projects and try to make 3 of them work for them And I want T-Token to represent the genuine value of open source. That's what its potential is. The market cap for T-Token could be that of the entire open source ecosystem's value. And if it does become that, then it will be easy for it to fund people's salaries, like to pay equivalent to a FANG position.
Yeah, well, I mean that would sound amazing. Do you have any like more like do you have any more like specific examples of anyone you've spoken to who so first of all, like what's the status of tea.xyz? Like, can you use it today? Like are certain projects on it already?
Yeah, so the package manager's up, the CLI, as we call it. It's been up since November. It's getting some great feedback. It's a cool tool, worth checking out. Honestly, it's better than Brew. Like it is. And
Well, I hope
it's
so.
fun.
If you did it the first time, I hope
Yeah.
you learned something over the last 10 years, try to outdo yourself.
It's a lovely thing. I really like it. It's my finest work. So yeah, that's getting good growth. Like by the end of the year, I reckon we'll have 1 million users, which yeah, it's good. I guess it was,
Yeah.
but like Brew didn't have 1 million in a year, but this time around I got my fame, which is helping. And then we're launching the GUI in May, so probably by the time this podcast is up, people will be able to grab that. I think the GUI is super awesome. Every day I look forward to the new nightly build to see what my developers have put into it. I obviously shape the goals a lot. But the protocol or the blockchain component, we're launching that later this year. So we'll have a testnet up hopefully by Q4, and then blockchain mainnet probably end of the year is pushing it, so probably early next year. And if you have the CLI or the GUI installed, then you'll be ready to use the protocol, both as an open source developer with projects, or as someone who's just interested in participating, getting those stake rewards based on the value of open source software.
Very cool. Very cool. Where can people learn more about this? And do you have any last concluding thoughts about this whole discussion?
Yeah, so tea.xyz is our domain. It was the only T domain I could get, and I was like, I want a 3-letter domain. I actually really
Nice.
like it with hindsight. It's got good SEO. There's no other TXYZs out there. It's got all the info. You can go to the GitHub. You can install the CLI. We got a one-liner bash installer like every DevTools project, or it's a single binary download. You don't need to install it. You can just download the binary, put it wherever you want, and it will work. Because I know people hate those installers, although ours is fine, just like everybody else's is. Like I did wonder for a while if there was a way to work around that, but it. See, anyway, the GUI makes it simpler, actually. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm getting off topic.
No, I'd be interested to see what that looks like, because it's sort of, I feel like it could kind of point you in the right direction to your projects, and maybe it could do things like, I mean, I don't know if this is a bad idea or a good idea, but if you had a graphical interface that could include things like recommendations and
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to turn it into a whole
No, I
get
think
news
that's
updates, but no, like productivity recommendations.
Yeah, totally. It's the thing, like I say, there's so much potential at the package manager layer. There's all this wonderful open source software, and half of it no one's ever heard of because
Yeah.
there's just so much. How do you discover that? And the place to do it is some app that knows what you've installed and can recommend other pieces. So we're totally really excited about what we can do over the course of this year after we've released the first iteration of that. And nobody's really done this before. Like, sure, people have made GUIs for package managers, but it's literally just like a copy of the interface into the GUI with no real consideration for what could be done that's different. And so as a result, none of them ever caught on, because what's the point? It doesn't add anything.
Yeah, exactly. It just slows you down. All right, well, this sounds really cool. I'm looking forward to check it out. The website is tea.xyz. Max, thank you so much for being on the show. I'll give you the last word if there's anything else that you want to add before we head out.
Yeah, well, check out Tea, and like we're always looking for people to get involved with the community, and it's a good time to do so because it's new. Like I was saying, like the time to get involved with open source is when the projects are new, because then if you do like it, you become a vital part of that piece of software and the community that evolves.
All right. Awesome. Great advice. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that and also last week's episode on the Dictator of Easton. After a few weeks of those kinds of episodes, I think I have some commentaries to get off my chest, some issues that need airing. So maybe we'll spend a few episodes hearing from me and maybe Aaron on that. Have a great week, everyone. That's the show. To support the Local Maximum, sign up for exclusive content and our online community at maximum.locals.com. The Local Maximum is available wherever podcasts are found. If you want to keep up, remember to subscribe on your podcast app. Also, check out the website with show notes and additional materials at localmaxradio.com. If you want to contact me, the host, send an email to localmaxradio@gmail.com. Have a great week.
Feel the power.